things by saying that, for those of you who don't know me or who haven't noticed yet, I do have a speech impediment. I stutter, so I find it helps me to just say that up front, in case I do get hung up while I'm speaking. If if it seems like I'm malfunctioning, I want to rest assured it's only because I am, and I will be fine. So my name is Sean Gates, and I am a terrible science fiction author. And you say, but wait, maybe we're here to talk about historical fiction. That's true. I want to kind of talk about that journey that I took to get from being a not so great science fiction author to being apparently a pretty good historical fiction author. Because I used to write about a hitman, a soldier for hire, a murderer, in a dystopian future. And they weren't mystery novels because genre is malleable, as I like to say. I mean, there's no difference really between like Spencer or Reacher and, say, Sir Galvin, or a samurai. They're all the same guy. You can change the time, the place, the words, the language, what he wears, what kind of weapon he carries strapped to his hip, but he's the same guy. Genre is malleable. So I was writing mysteries, but I was doing it in the science fiction way because I always read science fiction when I was a kid. That was my thing, science fiction. And then I got to be, I don't know, 20-ish. I started not liking science fiction. I couldn't figure out why. I thought, boy, it's not making very good science fiction now. It's just terrible. And then it never occurred to me that maybe what had changed was me. And I think it was. I think it was me. I think that I got to the point in my life where I stopped dreaming about the future and started thinking more about the past, and became much more interested in human stories than in larger concepts about, spaceships or aliens who come to Earth and think we're just terrible, because I don't want to read that. No, I'm not going to buy your book. So, I was writing mysteries using science fiction trappings and trying to tell a redemption story. And I don't think it was working. But the two things that my first character, or the thing really that my first character has in common, that Harry Cogbill from my current work have in common really, is that if I were to describe them to you, the first one, as I said, was a hitman in a dystopian future trying to find redemption. Harry Cogbill is a World War II veteran in rural Virginia in the late 50s, early 60s, trying to find what's good in the world. I think you could say they're both haunted. And I've come to think really that we're all haunted. That we're all haunted by an actual spirit of some kind, or by things we've done, things we've said, things we haven't done but we should have, things we haven't said but we should have, things we've seen, places we've been, experiences we've had, that heartbreak, that failure. And so I think really what I write about is being haunted. It doesn't matter if I'm writing about it in a science fiction setting, or if I'm writing about it in 1959 King George, as is the case with this book here. I apologize. I worked about 14 hours yesterday. Didn't quite have as much prep time as I had hoped, so I'm going to figure this out as we go. So, about 2006, I was at my cousin's wedding, and I'm sitting at a table at the reception with my uncle Ernie, who used to be the editor for the Newport News Daily Press. And as is always the case, when I'm sitting at a table with my Uncle Ernie, we got to talking about writing. And being the consummate journalist that he is, he asked a lot of questions, and he asked me, what are you writing? And at the time was one of my science fiction hitman things, and so I explained it to him. And again, being the consummate journalist, he acted as if this was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. I assured him it was not. And then he posed to me a question that haunted me for 10 years or so, because he said, have you ever thought about writing something that's set in a place that you know intimately well, that you can write about with authority, with absolute confidence, that you can speak to it in a way that no one else can? Have you ever thought about that? No, I write science fiction. No. But now that he said it, I was thinking about it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. For 10 years, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so the first thing I did is when I went home, I tried to figure out how to incorporate just a little bit, just a tiny little bit of Virginia into this post-apocalyptic science fiction world. Did not work. Did not work. But the one thing it did is it proved to me that I wanted to be able to write something that took place in Virginia, and maybe more Virginia as I know it. So I mentioned hauntings. Growing up, there were two big mysteries that have fascinated me in my life. The first one is that the neighborhood that I grew up in used to be a small grass field airport, and the street that I grew up on was the runway. And I didn't know anything about it except for that. Everyone who lived there pretty much knew that, because the houses had only been starting to be built since like 1961. And a lot of people who lived there were the original owners of the houses. So people knew this. But to me as a kid, it was not much way for me to find out more about it than that. And there was, at the turn into the neighborhood was a Texaco, it's a Shell now, and there was a sort of a barn behind that my friends and I snuck into one day. It turns out it was a hangar. And inside there were pieces of old planes, there was a windsock, and an REO Speedwagon. It was the most fascinating machine I think I've ever seen. So there was something there, and I always wondered about it, but I just didn't have any way to find out. The second one is, although I did not know that the house that I was living in was haunted, I did suspect it. A lot of times as a kid, I always felt this masculine presence watching me, sometimes right over my shoulder while I was doing things. And it was weird at first, but when you don't know anything else, it eventually becomes normal, and it did. So about 2003, I was a few years out of college. I had quit my first job as a graphic artist because, as an artist, I suppose, I felt I had sold my soul and needed to find something else to do. And a friend of mine from my college days phoned me up, and he said, so I just got fired. He had said the wrong thing to the wrong person in front of the wrong person at exactly the wrong time, which is the story of my friend's life. I have to say that. We all have that one friend. A lot of times you have friends, they're people you like to hang out with, they're people that just make you feel comfortable and happy. We also have that one friend whom we're friends with because they need a friend. This is that guy. He needs a friend. If he can screw something up, he will do it. He will find a way. You can give him something unscrew-upable, and he will screw it up. So he was working as an historical interpreter at Colonial Williamsburg, and he got fired. Around the same time, his roommate in the apartment that he was renting, his roommate had gotten shot in a mugging that went bad and was laid up in the hospital. And that guy's parents came and moved all his stuff out of the apartment, basically, even if he recovered, he wasn't coming back. So this friend of mine had no job, no roommate, didn't even have a pot. He figured out how to make instant mac and cheese in an automatic drip coffee maker, which is impressive. And based on the results I've seen, is a heck of a weight loss program. But Yeah, he phoned me up. He did not ask me for help. It's not his way. I suspect he knew I would volunteer it. So as I said, I was still living at home at my mom and dad's house, and we had a spare bedroom that we had been using for storage for 20 odd years at that point, and I knew if I talked to them, I already knew what they would say, and they did. And about a month later, we moved my friend in. I think he spent his first night in that room, but he came out in the morning, and you could tell he hadn't slept. I mean, the circles under his eyes, the hair, the whole thing. And he was like, that ghost wouldn't shut up. I said, what? The ghost, there's this old man. There's this old man, and he lives in that room, and he's been in that room for years, and he's watched you guys, just watch you, and me, grow up. He's been here forever. He was here before the house. So his family farmed this land. And he's sad because you all kind of know that he's here, but you don't really know that he's here. You hear it when he knocks something over, and you notice that something got knocked over, and you don't know how it got knocked over. You smell his cigarettes, but you don't know that he's here. So it was a little creepy. But, you know, I knew that the street I grew up on was a runway. The land that I lived on was part of an airport, not a farm. The man he described was dressed like it was the 1940s. Just didn't fit. So the first time I had proof that the house was haunted, and I just ignored that proof entirely. I think it's human nature, right? I just ignored it entirely. So 3 years after that, my friend moved out, was the wedding reception, the conversation with Uncle Ernie. And another, I would say 2-3 years after that, my parents were finishing up renovations on the house. The man that they hired had his electrician out on site this one day. They were hanging up a ceiling fan, and I came home from work. And I listened to the conversation that they were having. They were talking about places they worked where they had encountered something spooky, places they had lived where they had encountered something spooky. And, you know, most of you here, all of us are writers. You know, you collect stories. So I was just standing here listening, and finally, out of a lull in the conversation, I said, "Have you ever encountered anything here?" He said, "Well, you know, now that you mention it, when I'm working, a lot of times I feel like there's somebody right up on me, looking over my shoulder." Welcome to my childhood, Mitch. So he went on and told this whole story about how, you know, when he was on his first construction job, he'd had a major accident, head injury, had the whole out-of-body experience, kneeling before the throne of the Lord, the whole thing. Came back, wakes up. He says, ever since then, I could see things that no one else could see. Demons, angels, lost souls, the whole thing. He's like, if you want, I'll walk through the house and see what I can find. I'm like, well, I mean, you know, he's full of shit. Sure, go on, do it. So he walks through the house, and in a while he ends up in the spare room, and he's in there for a while. Now, as Charles Dickens would say, this must be clearly and distinctly understood. This man has never met my friend, the friend who slept in that room and got kept up all night by the old man. These two people never even seen each other, don't even live at the same zip code, don't even, nothing. This guy comes out. He says, so there's this old man. And he's sad because he's been here a long time. He's connected to the land from before, the houses and everything else. You all kind of know that he's here, but you don't really know that he's here. He appears in a shaft of blue light. He says his name is James. So, mystery sort of solved. From that point, I started thinking about maybe I should write a paranormal mystery, because this is something that happens in King George, because that was the whole thing. You know, my uncle said, "Can you write a story that's set in a place that you know?" The only place I know is King George. And what the hell really happens in King George? Nothing. Well, there's history there. There can be hauntings. That can be a thing. So I was writing a paranormal mystery. One of the characters was a handyman who could see things. One of them was
Hi.
a ghost. So I was doing...
Hello, Ilona. Hello. Do we know each other?
Writing a paranormal mystery that I hope would, you know, be the answer to that question. This is what happens in King George. There's history, there are hauntings, there are things there from the past that can intrude on the present. Maybe that's the answer. And I wrote that for a while. But the thing about that is whatever you're thinking about, you'll find. And they always say you should never invite the paranormal into your life. And I'm just going to say right now, true story, don't. You do not do it. Because, you know, in 30 years, I never saw a ghost. I felt presence. I never saw a ghost. Never heard his voice. And then when I started focusing on it, yeah, I saw him smoke, blue light, the whole thing, cigarette, heard his voice. Really deep bass, amazing voice. Yeah, do not invite the paranormal into your life. It screws things up. So I stopped writing that book. It's just I felt like I can't focus on this or I'm going to not recognize reality soon. That's not a good thing. So I put it aside. And for a long time, I didn't write. Probably almost 10 years, really, I didn't write. I mean, I worked on a script for some small film I was producing or whatever, but I didn't really write. Not write. So the year was about 2017, I think. And some of my friends and I, we got together with the idea of starting a news outlet to serve King George County because the local newspaper had shut down some years prior. We felt that there should be a way to, you know, share news with the locals. Trying to figure out how to set it up. Should it be a print publication? Should it be online? Should it all be current events? Should we do historical stuff? Should we feature art and literature? Yes to all. So we decided would be like a website would be the best and cheapest way to do it, since none of us had a lot of money to invest in it. And in that first meeting, one of the guys talked about how he was really into history, and he had spent a lot of time at the library looking through old newspapers from King George from the 40s, 50s, 60s. He's like, you know, I learned that the airport I learned that the neighborhood where you grew up, meaning me, used to be an airport. Like, yeah, that's true. And everyone else at the table was like, really? Like, yeah, like, I thought everyone knew that. And they're like, no. And the lady who runs the meetings was like, you have to write that story. You have to write that article. And I said, I've just told you everything I know. It used to be an airport. That's it. Period. The end. No. Go do the research, find out about it. You have to be the one, because you're the only one who lived there, and you're the one who can care. And I'm like, well, and not only that, but if I'm being honest.
Where was the airport?
You know, I can get some solutions to this problem I've been thinking about my whole life. Why did it stop being an airport? Why was it one in the first place? Who was there? Who ran it? Who lived there? And just maybe, who was James? So I followed my friend's lead and went to the library and looked through all the old newspapers, and eventually I found a few leads that led me to the clerk of the court's office looking through old land records. And what I found, I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into it, but what I found is that the people that invested in it come down from Maryland. And one of them was a habitual scammer, con artist, and the other one owned an asphalt business, and both of them were Greek. seemed kind of shady, and if you don't know, Baltimore and Washington, the whole area is run by the Greek mafia traditionally. These days there's not much of them left, but once upon a time. So I was looking at it and going, And of course, all of the hard facts, the things that would be incriminating against anybody are lost to history and time, and, no way to know. I thought, there's a story there, and I can't write it as the newspaper thing. That I have to stick to what I could find out. So there's an article. But then separately from that, there's a story that's going to be fictional, a story I can, make up things that I can't find out any other way. I can change all the names. I can do my own thing. As for Mr. James, turns out the people that ran the airport ran it for about 15 years, and they bought it from a family called Peed. And the Peeds had purchased the land in 1886. The fellow who bought it was a Civil War veteran, 9th Virginia Cavalry. His name was John Nathaniel Peed. He was from King George. He was born in Hampstead, and he grew up in a community called Owens, because his mother was from Owens. She was Nancy Owens. And after her husband died, she took her sons and went back to her family's farm. John Nathaniel Peed lived to be 96 years old. He died in 1936 from complications of pneumonia. He was the Justice of the Peace from the community of Owens. Also in the war had been his brother. While John survived the war, his brother died in a POW camp in Point Lookout, Maryland. Fallen without Manassas, I think. John's firstborn son was 11 when they moved to the farm known as Cloverdale, which is now Bayberry Estates, and my parents' home. Firstborn son was named after the brother who died. Their name was James. James Oscar Peed. So, hauntings.
Wow.
But that said, thought I'd read a couple of short passages that deal with the way the past intrudes into our lives in various ways. A couple of little short things here. This first one comes from a scene where my main character, Harry Cogbill, the aforementioned World War II veteran with PTSD, he was searching for goodness in the world. He's met this young woman named Ethel Burkett, a very spirited young woman. He's 40, she's 23. And she's gotten into an argument with her father, who is a widower and a grouch and sort of a hard ass. And she went to stay with Harry for a few days. 1959, he's 40, she's 23, they're not married. It's just not done. So they're in downtown Fredericksburg for the day. We parked on the street near J.C. Penney, where Ethel picked up a few clothing items, and we strolled around town a while, enjoying the pear trees and mossy brick sidewalks, the green staples of the churches rising high above the colonial architecture and warm shop fronts. Somewhere below the asphalt, the original cobblestones were still in the ground, like all of history, an uneven foundation upon which the modern world is built. Autumn was in the air, and a cool, gentle breeze rustled in the pear trees, and the first of the leaves surfed the currents around us, clattering off the shop windows and swirling around entryways. We held hands and walked slowly, lingering amid displays and street corners. And for a morning at least, all the darkness of the world melted away in peace and comfort followed us, like the rich, fruity scent of pipe tobacco along streets where Mary Ball Washington once walked, and James Monroe had practiced law, and the ghosts of Union and Confederate dead leaned on long rifles, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes in shaded doorways, pushing the brims of their kepis back to feel the cool air on their soot-darkened brows. And the next one is when she goes home to see her father and try to work some things out. The book is narrated by Harry Cogbill, but this is the first and only scene in the book. It happens a lot more in the second book that I'm working on, but this is the only scene in this book where he tells us about something he wasn't actually there for. While I was busy wrecking everything I touched, Ethel was having a confrontation of her own. Although it has been my custom in this telling to account only my own experience for the sake of completion, I feel I ought to include this portion of Ethel's story as well. Thank you, Trey. It was mid-morning when Ethel drove over the cattle guard and up the long orange wheel ruts to the turnaround in front of her daddy's house. She could remember the smell of the kitchen when her mother was alive, baking pies, mopping floors, and scrubbing mud out of jeans on an old washboard until her fingers bled. A decade had passed, and the warmth that Alice Pope Burkett had brought to the house was like a phantom that dwelt in the shadows, lingering in the closets and the dark end of the staircase. If Frank had ever cried for his wife, it was done in private, and Ethel never knew of it. And Ethel had cried, she had mourned, and confided in girlfriends, but her father, like his grief, seemed entirely removed from her. At 14, she drank, smoked a few cigarettes, went skinny dipping in the Rappahannock with her friends, and slept with boys. By 19, she had grown up and learned that she was an island, that her wit and insight were sharper than the sword of Damocles, and she needed no one to tell her what she was capable of. Now, in her 20s, the home she had loved felt alien to her. When she parked the truck in front of the house, Frank was cut in the far field and did not acknowledge her presence. The field was golden and the trees green and tipped with the first spark of autumn. The air motor was brilliant white in the sun, the tail streaked with rust, the words Chicago, Illinois still visible in red upon it as she squinted. This place, which had always been beautiful in her mind, was tainted with a sadness that seemed to dull the colors and numb the spirit. She had not noticed it before, or had grown so accustomed to it that she scarcely had been aware of it. Ethel marched into the house, went to her room, and changed into a pair of overalls and a work shirt. She got her boots and gloves by the back door and went to work. At noon, she made ham sandwiches and lemonade and brought them to the porch to a small table between a couple of chairs where they regularly took their lunch. Frank ate with her as he always did, but did not speak or acknowledge her in any way. "How are you feeling, Daddy?" The hell kind of question is that? The kind one human being asks another, have you been getting along? Didn't expect you home. Well, God damn it, Daddy, I'm still your daughter. He downed the last of the lemonade, crushed some ice with his molars, wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and stepped off the porch. She collected the plates and glasses and went to carry them inside, but her hands began to tremble, and she threw the whole thing at her feet. The plates chipped, and the glasses broke, and melting ice ran between the planks. "No, you don't." Frank paused briefly at the sound of her voice, but did not turn to face her. "Franklin Davis Burkett, will you for God's sake say something?" He stopped again and called back over his shoulder. "What do you want me to say?" "Hell, I don't know. Tell me you love me. Say you miss me or you're happy to see me. Tell me I'm a bitch and you wished I'd stayed gone. I don't care, but for once in your life, say something." Sandwich was good. The tractor spat a stream of black exhaust out the stack as the booger rumbled to life. That evening, when the shadows grew long in the sky, it looked like a mural of purple mountain peaks with their foothills awash in flame. Frank put the tractor in the barn and came in for supper. None had been prepared. Daddy, we need to talk. About what? Uncle Jack's in trouble. What kind of trouble? Bad trouble. There's gangsters doing business out of the airport. They probably killed Grandpa Jim. Uncle Jack is under duress and you might be in danger. What kind of crap is Cogwheel filled your head with? You don't get it, Daddy. I hired him to look into this. That ain't all he looked into. She slapped him. The sound was like a gunshot in the big empty house. Daddy, why do you think I'm home? Knew he'd let you down eventually. Well, he hadn't let me down, Daddy. I'm here because I love you both. Because I shouldn't have to choose between you. Frank shook his head and turned his back to her, stepping into the shadows in the hall. He'd tell you what was in them papers. Well, he said it had to do with his service record. He got some colored boy killed in Ardennes. It broke him. Couldn't even shoot a damn Nazi. If he hadn't let you down yet, baby girl, he will. I promise he will. Well, he wouldn't be the first man in my life to do it. He wheeled on her. What the hell's that mean? What do you think it means? When have I not been here for you? You've never been here for me. When Mama died, it was like I lost you both. Here it goes, Daddy. You walk around this house and you weren't the field, but you're not here. Did you even give a damn when she died? He came stomping up and bent down and put his face in front of hers, and she was afraid he would hit her. Don't you ever say that to me again. Did you hear me, Ethel? Never say a goddamn thing like that again. But how do you think I felt, Daddy? I was dying inside, and every day I'd seen you, stone-faced and resolute. I had to be strong for you, strong for me. Jesus, Daddy, you didn't cry, so neither could I. Where did that leave us? You don't even realize how screwed up we are. What do you want from me? Disbelief rose in her throat and blossomed into bitter laughter. I want you to be happy, Daddy. Go date women and fall in love. Move on, for God's sake. It's what I'm doing. I just don't want there to be any question that I love you. I'm leaving this house, but I am not leaving you. Just promise me that you won't sit here alone feeling sorry for yourself. You're more than this. Or you used to be. She was in her room, packing clothes into a trunk. Then the rain came. She sat down in her bed and began to cry. Sheet lightning environed the night, and she thought she saw a lone figure out across the field. Had there been a black car on the road beyond the fences. In the next explosion of white light, the figure was gone. And so was the car. Now, one question I have.